Yep. Start the video.
Start the video.
Okay, the video's on.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody to the first General Committee meeting of the year. Hope everyone is rested and relaxed after a good Christmas. We have an apology from Councillor Brian Stockwell, and our Mayor is in the building and not far away. We have no presentations, no deputations, and because we haven't had committee meetings, we don't have committee meetings in January, so items that would otherwise be presented for the first time to the Council in the Environment Planning Portfolio Committee or the Infrastructure and Services Committee come straight to the General here today. For benefit of our guests in the gallery, any motions passed here today have only the status of recommendations that are forwarded to the ordinary meeting on Thursday evening, where they will be ratified as a decision of the Noosa Council or not. So first up we have amendments to the Environment Levy Policy and Private Land Conservation Policy Guideline, and we have Kerry Coyle and Dave Burrows. Welcome. Councillors, do you have any questions for our esteemed staff?
No, but given that it's our first meeting of the year, Mr Chair, I'm wondering whether we can relax standing orders and be a bit more informal in our approach with regard to...
You're going to sing?
No, just a bit of a conversation with staff with regard to some of these matters.
Well, as is tradition with the General Committee, it is not a formal meeting. It's more informal than the ordinary meeting. You won't be required to stand when you speak, and you can ask questions of staff prior to formal debate starting. But once formal debate does get underway, the standing orders do apply. So please, if you have questions for staff, feel free to make use of this time now and remain seated. And sing if you wish.
Don't get carried away.
I do have a couple of questions, I guess. When I read over the changes to the guideline, I noticed that there's some changes to the Land for Wildlife program, which isn't mentioned in the staff report. Specifically, there's a removal of the possibility of providing nest boxes, resource books, and open property days. And I'm just wondering if there's a reason for the removal of that word.
Councillor, the intent of changing it is not to exclude those things, it's just to actually make it more broader, that we're able to provide incentives in line with the intent of the program. That would definitely include those things that were sort of omitted. It's just basically a technical wording thing, but we're certainly not excluding those things.
Oh, okay, thank you. And the other question I had relating to that is also that in the current version of the guideline under Land for Wildlife, it refers for annual incentives program, but the word annual has now been removed, and I'm wondering if again that's a reason for that.
Well, the main reason is it's based on what the budget we're given. So, I mean, at the moment, this is the first year, the 1920 financial year, when we've had a budget to deliver the incentives. But, I mean, I'd like to think that would continue every financial year. But I guess just for that possibility that it may not. But you know, at the moment, for argument's sake, we're rolling out the two incentives, which is provision of tube stock, and there's up to 5,000 tube stock applications to come out, and also for assistance with weed management. So it's proving to be a highly successful program with landholders and members. So, but I guess it's kind of like a trial year, just to see how it goes. And certainly towards the end of the financial year, we'll be reporting on how we've done, and putting in a budget bid for that to sort of be supported in the following financial years.
Thank you. Thanks.
Hey, a question, Dave, about the proposed incentives for the VCAs. So you're proposing that the minimum available annual incentive be $1,630 per year, which was up from $1,500, and the maximum increased from $5,000 to $5,425. What was the thinking behind those amounts, by increasing it by those amounts?
CPI. The CPI increase over the last 5 years, which is around 8%.
Yeah, thank you. Joe?
My question along those lines, when was the last time it was increased?
It hasn't increased since Noosa Council's become
So
an
it's-
entity. Yeah,
So it's well worth reviewing and looking at a
Yeah.
CPI increase.
definitely.
My other question was similar to Councillor Jackson's first question. The change in the wording. My understanding is that those other initiatives consistent with the intent of Land for Wildlife, such as free native tube stock training, assistance with environmental and equipment loans, such as fauna cameras, would include the sort of things along the lines of nest boxes and
Absolutely.
like that is the intent. And so
Correct,
whilst
yeah.
it wasn't
Correct,
outlined as clearly as it may have been previously,
Definitely,
and we
yeah.
still intend to.
Yeah, and it's also, if I could just say, it's also going to be driven very much by what the members want, you know, so if they would like nest boxes, we can certainly provide that in the future.
And adjust the one point. The other question I had is, why is Appendix 3 now the voluntary conservation agreement that was in the document previously now essentially being deleted?
It's just too wordy, really. You know, it's a fairly large. Well, there's actually three things. There's the actual covenant document, then the agreement document, then plus some. Yeah,
just removed from there, but there will still be a voluntary
Absolutely,
conservation
yeah,
agreement.
definitely, yeah. It remains unchanged. Yeah.
That's what I was trying to allude to, that there is still a voluntary. I mean, looking at that, it almost appears that we're deleting the voluntary conservation agreement, whereas in fact it's just been deleted from the document. The agreement will remain. Okay. That was all I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Dave, one of the purposes of these amendments, as I understand it, is to increase the resourcing available and also the options for landholders who want to turn their property over to environmental protections. For the benefit of those who may be listening, can you explain the advantages of split zoning, please?
The advantages of split zoning financially, it's a lot more cost effective than doing a conservation covenant, which with survey costs and legal fees can be up to $8,000 per property at a minimum. Nature refuges, again, it's a high level protective mechanism, but it costs $4,500, and as a part of the report I've also noted that the Queensland Government currently is not in a position to adequately resource the nature refuge program. And the other thing about the split zoning is it's actually under the planning scheme, and it's a very robust mechanism. It goes over successive planning schemes, so it's going to be zoned as environment, conservation and management, so it's a high level protection at a lower price.
And that have to be introduced via amendments to the planning scheme.
Correct, yeah.
And you've also, part of the recommendations is that we ask for the nature refuge program to be adequately resourced. What form of the resourcing? Is it money or staff members available?
It's a staffing issue that the Nature Refuge Bench has. They're not in a position to actually progress through to Gazette the number of applications they're getting throughout the state.
Yes.
And so we're just basically going to be writing a letter that sort of states how we really, the council's got quite a number of nature refuges on their own properties, and we've got a number of private properties with nature refuges. So it's a good sort of relationship we've developed with the state. So it's going to sort of acknowledge that, and then just request that it be adequately resourced.
Okay. Joe?
Yeah, will there still be incentives for people looking at the opportunity to split zone their properties?
Yes. Exactly. There's still a VCO, it's still a voluntary conservation agreement, it's just a different protective mechanism.
So I just want to clarify that within each of those that continues.
Mm-hmm.
Ingrid?
I just want to follow on from what Councillor Josevich pointed out, and this may be more of a question of the CEO. The current guideline for partnerships has a copy of the contract in it, which therefore has been approved by council, and then means it's an approved contract format and wording. Given that, as Councillor Jurcevic pointed out, it is suggested to delete that out of the guideline, I assume the status of that contract would no longer have council approval, and council would no longer have a say of what the guideline, what the contract content actually stated.
Good question.
That's what I thought.
I'm just having a look at the agreement at the moment. Councillor, I haven't been through the agreement in detail. Would I be able to take that on notice, and if there's an issue then we can deal with it on Thursday night at the council meeting? I just need to go and have a look at whether there's any issues.
Well, I guess
with
the
that approach,
issue is not what's written there necessarily, although it may have given the split zoning concept, but the fact that once it's not in the guideline, it is in the hands of staff with no requirement for council approval of what's in the contract. So I think that's my current question.
Yeah, and the same question would apply to Appendix 2, which is the example of a covenant as well, and I just need to have a look at that.
Okay,
Yep.
so we'll review that
Yep.
on
Thursday doesn't need to. We can get some advice back to council before then.
Can we leave the matter on the table then until Thursday's meeting? Or?
You can do it a couple of ways, as always, with these things. One way is to deal with it as we, what's the staff are recommending at the moment, and then if there's an issue with that, you can make the amendment on Thursday night to deal with that. That's probably the cleanest way of doing it.
Right.
Councillor Wellington.
Yeah, Dave, just making this comparison as you do in the report between a VCA and split zoning, and I accept that a split zoning is probably more efficient and cheaper. Nevertheless, a VCA covenant transfers with the property title, correct? Yes. Whereas you refer to a high level of protection in the planning scheme re split zoning, but the planning scheme can be changed. And indeed, a new owner might request that split zoning be removed, for example, in the next review of the planning scheme. So it would seem to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that a VCA goes on in perpetuity, whereas a split zoning has the opportunity to be changed by council.
Definitely a conservation covenant or a nature refuge runs with the title, but again, the zoning is on the property, and I'll probably hand over to Kerry, but my understanding is that it had to be very compelling reasons to change the zoning back to rural or whatever it was prior, you know. So,
and it's the council who makes that decision.
Yes, yeah, I appreciate that.
And the other thing is that
that's the point I'm getting to, though.
The other thing is it's probably, you know, given over the 5 years, it could be an investment of up to $25,000 on the VCA. So that big investment would need to be protected. So that'd be foremost in council's thinking before they'd likely look at removing that zoning after putting all that investment into the property to manage its environmental values.
Mm. So maybe we could hear from Kerry, if that's all right, Mr. Chair.
Of course.
In terms of the likelihood of council changing a split zoning at the request of a property owner when we're in a review or a new planning scheme mode.
I think both are potentially subject to a request to council to change. So one, with the covenant, a landowner could request that be removed from the title. As with the zoning change, that could also be requested of council, and council will have to consider each one at a time, depending on what reasons they put forward. The zoning, though, as we know, is not a simple process to amend a planning scheme. It goes through state review and public notification, and so it would be one that we would have to carefully consider and not automatically just agree to that zoning change. So I think the zoning is still a robust tool for us to use, and in this instance a cheaper tool than the covenant process.
Okay.
Similarly, doesn't Land for Wildlife, it doesn't specifically hold the landholder to any covenant. No. So I mean, we already have an agreement with the landholder that has no effective tenure with the next landholder. So,
but Land for Wildlife doesn't provide a real protection. That's just a voluntary participation in terms of the way you treat your land. That's nothing like having it either in a planning scheme or on the land title.
I'm gathering your suggestion that the split zoning is a step up from that for somebody that wants to progress their Land for Wildlife to
absolutely
the next stage, perhaps, and actually give it a bit more protection.
So, is there another possibility here that there is more flexibility in a split zoning? Because, for example, Land for Wildlife, you have to have a minimum of 5 acres, I think it is. Otherwise, it's not considered appropriate.
Correct.
Would there be any land size issues with regard to split zoning versus VCAs?
I think the only thing you need to do is look at your setbacks from dwellings, because you've got to look at potential bushfire management. So you really want to have that planning scheme designation a long way from any dwellings or infrastructure, so you're not compromising any values down the track in terms of safety of the people or the safety of the dwellings, or actually having to clear some of the conservation area as well. So, but definitely if the values are there in the smaller properties, like rare and threatened species on site, it's certainly a very compelling argument.
Kerry, you look like you wanted to say something.
No, I probably agree with what Dave's saying, that we just need to have a look at making sure we provide sufficient room for the house, on-site effluent and fire buffers, and not have those in the open space.
So you can do a split zoning on a 2-acre property as readily as on a 20-acre property?
Yeah, subject to it meeting those fire buffers and on-site effluent. Yeah.
But one would think that would be part of the agreement of the split, is that fire breaks and all that are managed as part of that before the agreement is completed.
That's right.
Okay. Council, we have a...
I'm about to move the recommendation as a motion.
Okay, move Councillor Wellington. Seconded Councillor Juricevic. Councillor Wellington.
Welcome back, Dave. Great
Thank you.
job.
Thank you very much.
That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
That was quick. I
Ingrid.
would move a minor amendment.
Yep.
Kathy has it ready, I believe. And Kathy, I think you might remove that word annual, as it appears a bit redundant. I'm just, I'll read it. This way. Item B.
Sorry, what was
That-
B?
Sorry? That item B.
I can move it up next to us.
Oh, okay,
Thank you.
that's
Yeah.
easier. That item B be amended as follows. B, approve amendments to the policy guideline, private land conservation partnerships as provided in attachment 2, with wording of the 5th dot point under the heading support for land for wildlife to read, and this is what's different, or it's actually not different, it's the same as the current thing. An incentives program may consist of other initiatives consistent with the intent of the Land for Wildlife program, such as free native tube stop training assistance with environmental lead management equipment loans, such as fauna cameras, nest boxes, resource books, and open property days.
I'll second it.
Thank you.
You're going to ask me to speak, Mr. Chair?
Oh, you're welcome to speak
Oh,
when,
all right.
when you're ready.
Yes, I have.
Unless councillors have any questions.
I'm trying to ascertain where attachment 2 is.
No, it's been seconded, so Ingrid has
Well,
the floor.
attachment
It
2.
was mentioned earlier. It said
There's nothing new in the
No,
black
no,
writing.
No.
I wasn't questioning that. I have seen the environment levy policy, which was attachment 1, private land conservation's partnership. I'm just trying to ascertain what attachment 2 specifically is in the document. So,
It's a guideline.
The guideline.
in the guideline.
Guideline.
Big one.
Okay, well, I might just
So where that 5th dot point fits in is all I'm just trying to ascertain. Sorry.
briefly speak. It's actually on page 15, Joe.
Yep, sorry. That's right. I just found it. That's right. I just
Yeah,
found it.
look, this is just related to the question I asked a little bit earlier. I'm just reinstating the wording that's already currently in the guideline. So it's not really a change, but I just found that it was removed, and I felt it was unnecessary to remove wording that seemed, you yourself, Dave, have said that that would be acceptable wording. All I've done is added back the nest boxes, resource books, and
I see
open
what you
property
mean.
days. All that is always written in terms of such as, or could be. It is not definitive that you have to get this, so it doesn't actually change the meaning of or the content of what's written there. But I thought, given that it has been written in there, I'd suggest keeping it in there.
Yeah, just a question. Again, the reasons for striking it out of the guideline was...
Just to make it less verbose, basically, just to make it more efficient, but it hasn't reduced the intent at all.
Okay.
No.
Any other councillors wish to speak?
No, happy to support that amendment because I think it.
Councillor Wellington.
Yeah, I only want to speak about one thing, and that is, let's not pretend that nest boxes are necessarily going to be functional. I think you would know, Dave, that the only useful nest box is one that's regularly monitored. A survey of nest boxes around the ACT found that all but one of them had non-target species in them, mostly introduced species. Indian miners take over nest boxes, non-native bees take over nest boxes, etc. So if you have a nest box, you have to be prepared to toss animals out of it, particularly non-target species. And also nest boxes in urban areas tend to actually encourage already common species in those urban areas like possums, etc., not necessarily what people are wanting them to do. So I just, I'm happy to support this, but with the proviso that I'm sure staff will treat nest boxes with due caution.
Noted. Any other councillors wish to speak to the amendment? Put the amendment. Those in favour? It's unanimous. Okay, we go back to the original motion. The only person who's speaking to that has been Councillor Wellington. Other councillors wish to speak to the original motion? Wish to close, Councillor Wellington?
No, thanks.
Put the motion. Those in favour? Against, motion is carried. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you very much.
Dave.
Well done.
Well done. Now go to item 2, which is a change application for a material change of use for entertainment and dining premises type 2 shop and salon, 6 Thomas Street, Noosaville, and welcome Tara Norley.
Thank you.
Councillors, any questions for Tara?
Bear with me 2 seconds.
I just had one on the
Jess?
this Friday to Saturday opening hours till 12 p.m.
Yes.
in conjunction with the Noosaville locality code. Is that standard? I don't remember not the junction. Sorry. Only Noosaville. Is that standard in Noosaville? I don't remember being that late.
Yeah, it is standard for Noosaville.
It is.
Yeah.
Just Friday, Saturday, because from it's 7 till 10 Monday to Friday, or no, Monday to Thursday, and then Friday, Saturday, 7 till 12. Is that right?
Yeah, Sunday till Thursday till 10. Yep.
Yeah. Is that standard?
That's standard in along Gympie Terrace
Yep.
because of the residential close by.
Okay.
John?
So when you make the change from the 1985 to allow a maximum of 1,306 square metres GFA, change to the present, last paragraph on page 34, to the current GFA 417.9 square metres maximum GFA and 83.6 maximum non-residential component. Is that in the 97 scheme?
What page are you on,
I think it goes back
Bottom of
earlier.
So
page
there's
34.
a comment at the bottom of,
Page 34.
with regard, if you look at page 38 and the Noosaville, the built form, the gross floor area is proposed as 439 over 417.9 by the scheme, but at the bottom of page 34 it mentioned that in 1985 it was allowed a maximum of 1,306 square metres gross floor area. And I'm just wondering when that actually changed.
So
Probably only be the 1997 scheme or the
97
2006
scheme would have been
yeah,
when that was
Yeah,
all
so
reviewed.
yeah,
since
it was
then.
in one of the amendments to the 85 scheme. I'm not quite sure of the time, but I'd say it was probably around the 90s when the strategic plan came in 97. So this development was originally built in 1987, so it goes back some time. But yeah, the superseded scheme had a plot ratio of 0.8 rather than 2:1.
Sorry, 0.8 versus?
0.8 is to 1,
Yep.
compared to 2:1, which was in place when this development was first approved.
Okay. That was the only question I had.
Okay.
I'll move.
Yeah. Moved Councillor Glasgow, seconded Councillor Jackson. Wish to speak to it, Jess?
No, it's all been said. It's a good report.
Yeah.
It's a good report, yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to speak to it
In-
briefly.
Ingrid?
Yeah, look, I'd like to say that I think it's good to see an upgrade of this 1987 building on Thomas Street. It reminds me of the Tourism Noosa Refresh Noosa program, which aims to encourage resort unit owners to invest in keeping their resorts and units updated. And that is actually part of Tourism Noosa's value over volume strategy, which is about attracting visitors to Noosa who pay more rather than more visitors. So I think these sorts of tourism areas, and this is one of them, like tourist accommodation area, it's important also not just the accommodation houses, but also that the other services like restaurants and retail also keep up to date to attract appropriate customers. I think these old buildings along Thomas Street basically have the same problem as a lot of the old resorts built in the 80s. They are getting old and out of date and they look a bit daggy. So it's great to see this initiative to improve Thomas Street. precinct, and I think that's more up to keeping with what is developing along the Gympie Terrace area.
Sorry, I do have a
Councillor
further question,
Drewry.
if I may. With regard to the infrastructure agreement for the two car parking spaces, the rate of $15,000 per space, contributions in lieu of provision of on-site car parking council policy, how is it envisaged that that money will be quarantined with regard to where it be spent and what it is likely to be spent on, given our on-site car parking council policy?
Similar to council's infrastructure charges towards parks and roads, it's actually put in a separate account and quarantined each year to make sure it's set aside for specific purposes that it was taken. And the policy provides for a number of ways that the money could be spent, either through public parking, public transport, improvements to pathways and bikeways. In this area, there's limited opportunities to provide additional public parking, so I'd suggest it's probably more likely to spend on infrastructure towards public transport or pathways.
Look, I just wanted to thank you for the report, Tara. Very, very good, and also compliment you for working with the applicant on this. You've acknowledged that the additions are in keeping with the look and feel of the area, and it is a visual improvement. The additional floor space does, as you've said, does trigger the need for additional car parking, and you've reached an agreement with the applicant about that, so thank you. Now the councillors wish to close, Jess?
I just to say the same thing, Tara. It's great to see even the shop top housing on top is good for the area as well. And it's like exactly what everyone else said. It's a great report, and it's going to invigorate this street in the next 10 years. That's it.
Yeah. Put the motion, those in favour. Against, motion's carried unanimously. Thank you, Tara.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tara.
Next item is item 3. Development application for material change of use for a mixed-use commercial development at 218 and 20 Hoffmann Drive, Noosaville. Welcome, Glenn Conforti.
Welcome back. First open holidays?
Yes.
Yeah.
Writing this report.
Happy New Year.
Happy
Yeah,
New
yeah.
Year.
Thank you.
Welcome to the grilling.
Okay. Questions for staff?
Offer. Given the changes within the new planning scheme, the proposal here still doesn't meet the proposed changes to allow for greater usage or greater opportunities at this site?
That's correct. There's a range of uses in the draft new planning scheme, but in terms of the proposed showrooms, the new planning scheme allows for 3,500 square metres of showroom on this particular site along that northern border of the site. However, the new planning scheme allows for a showroom which is different to the showroom which the applicant is proposing, as the applicant has provided a tailored definition which includes a combination of a large format retail and showroom. So it's the nature of the goods which could be sold. And there's also a significant exceedance in the floor area that they're proposing when compared to the draft Noosa plan as well.
So the total showroom, as they call it, is 7,835, and the maximum allowable under the planning scheme is 3,500?
Correct.
And their definitions essentially equate to a retail shop rather than a showroom.
So something like a Spotlight or a Anaconda or a Chemist Warehouse is not likely to receive approval?
An Anaconda probably constitutes a standard showroom. A Spotlight is more a shop though.
A retail outlet?
Yeah.
As
And
is
Chemist Warehouse would also be a shop.
Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded Councillor Wellington. Yeah.
The development is being proposed on the outskirts of Noosa Civic on the other side of Hoffmann Drive. In the Noosa plan, the whole area is called the Shire Business Centre, and in the new Noosa plan, it's called the Noosa Business Centre. We all know that Council refused the application and won the appeal against extending Noosa Civic to make a bigger shopping centre. Yet this applicant wants to do just that, potentially extend the retail offering in an area which is not zoned for retail. Meanwhile, we still see empty shops in Noosa Junction and Noosa Civic, which suggests that adding further retail shops over and above the intentions of the Noosa plan and the UNOOSA plan is not needed. The Noosa plan places a priority on diversifying the Noosa economy with a focus on wellness industries, knowledge-based businesses, education and service industries, heritage and creative arts industries. Of course, the area around Noosa Civic also has some further potential for development, but not for shopping centre, rather a main street with some shops and entertainment opportunities, which will be more akin to a global village where people will be able to live, work and play. So the proposed retail, indoor sport and recreation, and the food and drink outlet being proposed by this applicant are not consistent with the intent of the Noosa plan or the UNOOSA plan, so I agree with refusing the application.
Thank you, Ingrid. Tony.
Yeah, a great report, thanks Gwen, really thorough, fantastic. Obviously what's being offered here is predominantly more retail, and as the report notes, that sterilises land that could be used for other business opportunities, and ideally business opportunities with greater employment capacity. It conflicts with the planning scheme, and we've been consistent in our support of our planning scheme to date. It also creates a whole new separate retail precinct, and one that you kind of have to drive to because the pedestrian linkages are not there. That means it would actually likely take retail customers away from Noosa Civic next door, but it would also inevitably have an impact on other retail centres. These sort of centres inevitably are designed around vehicles, and you can go to them down Wertulla Way and that sort of thing. And really it's quite difficult sometimes to navigate through the car parks to get from building to building. They're really not designed for pedestrians at all, and we have the same problem occurring here. It also comes at a time when retail is shrinking, although I know the national November figures were up for retail. December figures completely undermine that, and retail continues to shrink across the land. There's so many problems with this that it couldn't be anything but a refusal, given the design elements, the issues regarding building height and landscaping code, and car parking at considerable reduction in the allocated or recommended number of car parks, etc. A great report and a good result, I hope. Thanks.
Joe?
Yeah, I'm happy to support the staff position on this application. In conjunction with what both councillors have already said, I think this looks to supplement, not complement, the existing retail, and as such should be reviewed again and go back to the drawing board to see if they come up with a better outcome.
Yeah, look, great report again, Glenn. I think it's tremendous what you've written up here. And, you know, there's umpties amount of reports where we should be refusing this. You know, all the way from, you know, there's zero pedestrian linkages there. You know, the offset, so you can see it all from the road. From, I can't remember what street that's called again.
Hoffmann Drive.
Hoffmann Drive, yeah, sorry. Hoffmann Drive. You know, it's over building height. It's just everything it's done's wrong. So it's a great report, and I think this underpins exactly why Noosa is Noosa, is because we've held our line on developments like this, and I congratulate you. Thank you.
Ingrid, you wish to close?
I'll just thank Glenn also for the quality report. Thank you. And
Through the chair, if I just
Yes.
may, we're having the reasons of refusal reviewed by Council's planning solicitor to ensure they're as robust as they can be. So there may be some changes put to the ordinary meeting around the reasons.
Okay, thank you. Shall I put the motion? Those in favour? Against? It's carried. Thank you, Glenn.
Thanks, Glenn.
Next item is development assessment fees and charges variations. I beg your pardon.
No,
Item 4.
you're getting
Request to
it.
change the development
Carries through.
approval for material change of use of premises, multiple housing, type 4, conventional at 25 KAURI Street, COOROY, and welcome Patrick Murphy.
I've got a question for
Joe.
My understanding is that we already approved this design and the second iteration of this design previously, and having driven to the area, the infrastructure, the operational work seem to have been undertaken. So why is this back before us again?
So this application seeks to remove an access to the site from KAURI Street. There is no approval that reflects that at this stage. The applicant has an approval for operational works, has not provided the access to KAURI Street, I suppose in contravention of the current approval. They've advised if they had to remove that, if council wasn't supportive of this application, that they could do that. So just to reiterate that this application again seeks to remove that access in KAURI Street, which doesn't have current approval.
Do we see an issue with the removal of the access in KAURI Street?
No, as recommended in the report, we're supportive of that removal.
So we're happy enough that the two outlets on Olivine Street would be sufficient to meet the needs of however many units there are in the complex.
17
I
buildings.
thought there were, yeah.
Yes.
17.
May I ask a question? It's about the access. I was a little bit confused. The conclusion and reasons for decision on page 112 says the changes seek to modify the access arrangements by deleting the KAURI Street access and retain the two access points from Olivine Street. But then in the next paragraph, it says that it is recommended that pedestrian access from KAURI Street be maintained.
I think you picked up on my other point.
I'm a bit confused. It seems to be contradictory
One's pedestrian.
statements. So one's
pedestrian.
Yeah. So when the application was received, the removal of the access point didn't facilitate pedestrian access into the site, where previously they would have been able to come in through the driveway. So what we're seeking is a pedestrian link in that area to enable people to still be able to park in KAURI Street and walk into the site at that point.
right.
And therefore not have everyone going into the site and seeking to park necessarily on Olivine Street.
But remove the need for a pedestrian crossing.
For a driveway.
A driveway.
Yeah, so the vehicle access is to be removed,
Yes.
but a pedestrian footpath into the site is to be
Understand.
provided.
Having said that, I mean, my understanding from having driven up there is that the curb and guttering has now been placed considerably further into KAURI Street than the current alignment of the road.
I'm about to do that.
Thank
Can
you.
we get a photograph up, please?
Thank you. Yeah, that was my understanding. So where are they going to park?
So this came up at the COOROY Area Residents Association AGM a couple of weeks ago, and next day I took this photo. This is looking down KAURI Street with Olivine going off to the right and the developments on the right. And as we can see here, KAURI Street's quite wide at this point, but narrows when we hit the development. But it seems to me that that width is the same as the width of the KAURI Street beyond the development. However, the issues raised at Cara and Brett, please, Mr. CEO, I'd like a question on notice answered at the AGM for the sake of the issues that were raised by a number of residents at the Cara meeting. And the questions are, why was the width of KAURI Street narrowed at this point where the development is, rather than retained at the width that is at the beginning of KAURI Street? And why was there not an opportunity to widen Olivine Street, given that this development runs a significant length of Olivine and is now going to be a major access into the property? So if we could have answers from infrastructure and planning as to why that occurred, please. Why we're sticking with those road widths rather than using the opportunity to widen them.
We can probably answer that question now.
You can answer it now?
I can confirm that the Olivine Street road width was required to be what has been approved, in part because of the trees that we're seeking to retain on Olivine Street, that any further widening of that road would potentially impact on the tree root zones. So if you recall, there were a number of trees.
And they're being retained by the development.
They're being retained by the development. In terms of the width of KAURI Street, my recollection is it was to align with the alignment and the width of the road as you go further up the road. Yep. Because as you come down the road, there was a little bit of it was quite confusing the way the road was made as to where you would go, and if the, so I'm not really talking overly technical, but That was my understanding. Sorry, Tony, it was more around the alignment of the road.
Yeah, my understanding is it now aligns with the rest of Carey Street, and the anomaly is in fact this open end here near Diamond Street.
That's correct.
Yeah. There's also standards depending on the carrying capacity of the road or the intended function and the amount of traffic it will carry. So this meets the standards in terms of the amount of traffic it will carry in terms of its road width.
Olivine though is more of a lane than a street, and thus it doesn't have the width that you would normally expect on a street with parking.
Yeah.
There is just room for 2 vehicles to pass by if there is no parked vehicle.
Yeah.
Is it being treated differently to other thoroughfares in the town?
No, it meets the standard for that, the amount of traffic it will carry, so it meets the standard requirement.
I find that odd, given that there's commercial activity further up the road and community facilities further up the road.
Question, Joe?
That narrowing would be required. The question I've got relates to the need for a footpath. Council's operational works of footpath is typically only on one side of the street, yet we've required the developer here to put a footpath on the second side of the street, and the likelihood is it will never continue under council's direction in any other direction along Kauri Street.
Well,
so why would we require the developer to put a footpath in when no other footpath is likely to connect to it?
That's probably a good question to ask when we did the original approval.
Yeah, exactly.
We didn't have operational works come before council, so council couldn't have asked that question. I'm now seeing the operational works in place, and I'm raising the question for the first time that I've seen it.
Yeah, it would have been a condition of the MCU when it came to council, but I'll go back and have a look for you, Joe.
It seems an oddity.
You have an answer on Thursday night, Joe?
Please.
I'm just looking at page 110 under statutory instruments planning scheme access, and I'm just checking whether the first paragraph there relates to what we're talking about, where it says that Olivine Street will accommodate 600 vehicle movements per day, and then it says, as a result, the proposed changes represents a minor increase and will be significantly less than 600 vehicle movements for which the road is designed.
Yeah. So it comes back to the standard of road and what the design requirements are for that standard of road.
So what is written here implies that the change of removing the driveway out of Kauri Street won't be a problem for Olivine.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone care to move it?
I'll move it.
Moved Ingrid Jackson, seconded Jess Glasgow.
I don't really need to speak to this. It seems to be a minor change. I think it is justified very well. I have a lot of faith in Patrick's judgment, so it's fine.
Joe?
No, I'm not prepared to support this. Given that the operational works have negated any parking on the street, and the request here to remove the driveway provides for on-street parking, there is no on-street parking to be provided. So I'm not prepared to support this at this time until I get further information. I'm sorry.
Okay. Other councillors wish to speak? Wish to close?
Oh, no.
Okay, put the motion. Those in favour? Councillors Glasgow, Wellington, Jackson and Wilkie. Against? Councillors Borisovic. Okay, motion is carried.
No.
Next item 5, development assessment fees in charge. Thank you, Patrick. And charges variation for 1st of April 2019, 31st of December 2019. Hello, Kerry again.
Page 133.
Page 117.
Yeah, I think there's something wrong with it.
There's something wrong with the
Yeah.
It is page 133. Yes.
I noticed that on Friday, but I'm not sure.
Oh, so
Yeah.
A link or
I
something.
beg your pardon, yes.
I haven't managed to
The
print my
agenda's.
report.
It's on page
It is 133.
133.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, here's where I've got a question.
Joe.
Page 136, Karen.
Thank you.
The
Sorry,
NV
for some reason mine didn't print.
approval.
It's not
Which one, Joe?
Which one?
Page 136, the NBN approval. The paragraph 2 reads, the application is not considered a minor change under the Planning Act 2016. Paragraph 3 it's not considered a minor change. Paragraph 3 says, due to the change being relatively minor in nature. Which is it?
It's both.
Oh, now you're talking planning speaking.
Yeah, so a minor change under the Planning Act has got criteria for council to consider. One of those is if it involves a new property. This does involve a new property because they're taking access through a different property. So it can't be a minor change under the Planning Act, but the only change in relation to this tower that they're making is the access, which is a relatively straightforward.
Just the wording there seemed to be contradictory in nature to the two elements.
Fair enough.
Being considered. That's why I asked the question. It just didn't make sense when I read it. Okay.
Any other further questions for Kerry, councillors? Have a motion? Someone care to move it?
I'll move it.
Move Councillor Glasgow. Seconded Councillor Wellington. To speak to it, Jess?
No, it's a win sense, nothing really. It's just sort of standard business.
Okay. Anybody else?
Business as usual.
Business as usual.
All right, I'll put the motion. Those in favour? That's unanimous. Carried.
Thanks, Kerry.
Thank you, Kerry.
Thanks, Gary.
Good. Next up, item 6, the Noosa District Sports Complex Master Plan. Welcome Ash Sayward and Amanda Ty.
Thank you.
Questions for staff, councillors?
There is a small parcel of land out front where the sign used to sit on Butler Street, and I believe, redundant electricity pole there that's now being used for council's traffic sign. Is there any provision in this to look at reviewing the need for that electricity pole and or returning the land out front to environment as part of the offsets that are required?
As we've spoken about this previously, Joe, yes. So we...
No!
So in terms of looking at formalising the car park, with that eastern car park near the entrance of the complex, that when we look at formalising that, then we'll definitely looking at that as a re-veg to offset any losses from within the complex.
Thank you. It's about the only thing I can see that's not covered in there.
And in terms of the lighting pole, so a review and a need to provide lighting at the entrance of the car park, so of the complex. We'll look to see whether that pole is redundant or if that's something we need to keep for infrastructure.
Could be relocated perhaps or something.
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
I'd like to move it.
Move Councillor Juricevic, seconded Councillor Glasgow. Wish to speak to it, Joe?
Absolutely. 20 years overdue of upgrade works at the sports complex. I'm glad to see the master plan with all of the stakeholders involved producing, I believe, a great future potential result for all involved at the complex, and I'm sure that many of the entities involved are waiting for this to be finalised so that we can get on with resourcing the funds and the necessary works to be undertaken. That's it.
Any other councillors wish to speak? Wish to close, Joe?
No, I've said it all.
All right, put the motion. Those in favour? Carried unanimously. Next item is the KOOROY Sports Complex.
I'd like to move this one as well, Mr. Chair.
Move Councillor Juricevic.
I'll second.
Seconded Councillor Glasgow.
Ditto my previous comments.
Ditto.
See above.
Well, see above.
Okay.
Well and truly overdue, and some major works and significant works here that to see the KOOROY complex meet the needs of the community for many, many years to come with some necessary upgrade work well overdue.
Okay, wish to close? Put the motion. Those in favour? Motion's carried unanimously.
Great work.
Thank you, Amanda.
The only other comment is great work from the team to produce those both those.
That was unanimous, Kath.
Unanimous.
Musical doors.
Both those master plans. We look forward
I think
to.
Trent's on the way.
Thank
No,
you.
it's
Thank you, Amanda.
He came in this way while you ran out that way. You ran in this way.
Next item is item 8, Financial Performance Report. It is on page 149 of the agenda. Welcome, Trent.
Thank you.
Joe, just let me get back the spreadsheet.
I'm just waiting, Mr. CEO. Yes, the first question I've got, you know what it is. Staff training, 28k below budget.
Here we go.
We've been on target till now, Mr. CEO. Why are we falling behind?
You'd be pleased to know that there's commitments of 20. Just let me get this right. Some $33,000 in commitments have already been, in orders have been issued for next round of training.
Excellent.
And that was by 31 December. I can give you the breakdown if you'd like.
No, as long as it's committed, you know that.
Yep.
Second question. Parks and Gardens operations and maintenance programs, 161k below year-to-date budget. Why? Are services not being undertaken? I mean, this is contractual and ongoing maintenance works during. I know we've had a dry spell, but
Councillor, it's primarily due to maintenance of the parks and gardens, as well as arborist costs. So in terms of the annual schedule of work, the annual schedule of work hasn't changed. It's purely about timing being slightly drier than usual, and obviously coming into what could be more seasonal wet weather. As far as I understand it, the team has taken the conservative approach to ensure we have sufficient arborist costs to...
I assumed it might have been the dry weather. Thank you for confirming that that's the likely outcome. The next one is public amenities, material and services, 77k below year-to-date budget. I mean, I've been hearing complaints about the Noosa Surf Club toilets over the holiday period and in general with regard to the upkeep of those.
We get that every year, of course.
But that's not only through the holiday period, it's been outside of that as well. Why would public amenity materials and services be below year-to-date budget when that should be an ongoing service?
Their budget is broken up into a number of different categories. You've obviously got the cleaning and the cyclical maintenance. The other one is reactive maintenance. Obviously, as we know, the amenities are subject to vandalism on occasion and other destructive actions. It's actually the reactive maintenance budget that's below budget so far this year.
So the normal servicing's been occurring, it's just we haven't had any vandalism or any...
We have, it's just below what our budget expectation has been for the year, or the timing that we've allowed for that budget to be profiled during the year.
And for the record, I seem to recall those toilets get serviced 3 times a day at this time of year.
Yeah, during the year they're twice a day. These are the ones under the surf club, and then during the holiday period they go up to 3 times a day. But we still do get a lot of complaints about just the sheer volume that's going through there.
Well, maybe we need to review whether 3 times a day is sufficient at this time of year.
Quite possibly.
Yep.
So one for the service level review, and I think the last question: more lights in Hastings Street. Tree lighting replacement to be funded. Replacing tree lighting in Hastings Street.
That would be under the Hastings Street maintenance levy. Is that the query, Councillor?
Yep.
Yes. So as I understand it, there's been a program
to replace
the older lights.
I thought we'd done.
No.
They're funded out of the levy.
Yeah, I know, but I thought that all been done. There's still more lights to be replaced.
No, it's all completed as my understanding is now, unless there's any other further requests to come through. But that cost was mainly incurred in through September, October, November.
So tree lighting replacement to be funded from reserve in BR3. So the work's been done. We haven't paid for it yet. Is that?
The work's been done. The cost has exceeded the budget allocation for the Hastings Street maintenance levy. So we've obviously got the annual, the unspent allocation from the last.
That was my understanding that the work had
been
been complete. So I was wondering why we were still having an allocation of funds. That explains
the allocation. That's right. So we'll put more of that reserve cash that we've got set aside.
Thank you.
That
explains it. Thank you.
My question was the one just below that. The legal costs are 250k above and 71% up.
Yes.
How does that work? And then it says captured it by revenue.
So, as you know, our development planning section quite robust in their application of appeals and pursuing those. So, again, this year, legal and consulting costs associated with the appeals are above budget.
I can add to this too. We have a report coming to the next round of meetings in February, having a look at the history of our planning appeals over the last few years, what the costs have been, some of the trends and so on. So, and also what are our current cases underway. we've got that coming up into the February round of meetings.
Now, in terms of the comment about being offset by increased revenue, obviously separately within development planning, we have our development application fees. They're a cost recovery fee, but obviously depending on when the development applications come through, our development planning revenue is above budget. Now, obviously most of that is used for the direct cost of assessing those development applications. But across the entire section of development planning, obviously overall revenue is up as well as the expenditure.
So can I follow up on that question a little bit about the appeals being $250,000 over budget now, which is halfway through the year?
Yep.
Yes.
Do we have an understanding of how much more expenditure is likely on appeals in this budget year? And is there going to be an issue with the 1.1 million budget not being enough?
At this stage, we're expecting to put through a BR3 adjustment, a budget review 3 adjustment in April. At this point, it's looking like we will exceed the $1.1 million annual budget. Our finance and development planning work closely looking at all the different appeals that are currently in play, and based on when we expect those to occur, we do forecast a year in position. I'd have to take on notice how much it currently stands at, and I could advise that separately. But what we'll do is at BR3, the intent would be that we would recognise what overrun we're likely to achieve by year end at the BR3, because obviously our estimate now could change in 2 or 3 months' time if there's delays or some of those appeals are brought forward.
I'll just check, BR3 budget review 3 is
Correct.
in April, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Just add to that, in the first 6 months of this year, we had 2 of the significant trials underway as well. That was the one for Kenlin, which was the subdivision on David Low Way there, which we were successful in, and the other one was the Noosa North Shore holiday homes. Those 2 trials were actually in that period as well. So successful in both that one as well.
So yeah, is it possible to get an update for Thursday night's meeting of the appeals to date and those yet to come? And
well, that's what I've got a full report coming to the February round.
You got it in the February round?
Yep.
Okay.
So
And that covers historic, what we've been through over the last couple of years.
If we could get an update Thursday night, we've got a report coming to February round, that was
I mean, each year we have to make a guesstimate of budget time.
I understand.
So this has been discussed at the executive team level, and we may need to reconsider the amount that we've been regularly allocating on an annual basis for legal costs.
I think the report will go a long way to answering Councillor Jackson's question with regard to what we spent and what we've got yet to come.
Yeah, I think Councillor Jackson raised this at the end of last year and said we get a report to council and didn't have it ready for February. So, sorry, to January, so February will be the one.
On that comment about we win them, it still costs though, doesn't it?
Yeah. Correct. Yeah. It's better than spending that money and losing them.
Yeah, but it still costs, isn't it? Win, so we kind of.
We don't win them all, but we win the majority.
I can only recall one loss in 6 years. We haven't lost one in this term of council.
I think we lost one on signage.
What is the status of mediated?
Mediation.
I'm talking about going to trial where you spend the big money.
That's not a loss. That's an
Not a
agreed
loss,
outcome.
it's not a win, it's a kind of win-win.
Yeah.
Okay.
We haven't had a court ruling against us in this term of council.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I stand corrected.
There was an issue from the previous council that rolled over into this one, but as a result of decisions made on this council, we have can't think of a court.
No, in fact, the one you're talking about was the decision was the original Sunshine Coast Council and rolled into the first term of the Noosa Council. So that was in the previous term, but in this term we haven't had a court loss.
There'd be an element of cost towards all those mediations though as well.
Sure, absolutely.
It's the cost of defending the look and feel of Noosa that we have to accept is going to be part of our ongoing costs.
And we'll probably debate it, we'll talk about it in the next round, but my observations of getting the staff to have a look at the history is that most of the appeals we've had where we've had to spend the big money is where the application doesn't meet the planning scheme. We've refused it and then had that fight to defend the scheme, and that's where you have to spend a lot of money on. And it's mainly experts, more so than pure legal costs. It's an issue for us.
Yeah. Trent, waste disposal fees $160,000 below budget. Are you getting any feedback from staff about reasons why people are not taking their materials to the Resource Recovery Centre?
I think one of the key drivers has been actually that when there's a difference in parity between our pricing and neighbouring councils, when you've got your domestic collection trucks, such as Cleanaway or Remondis, or depending on the contractors used across those borders. In previous years, our pricing has been significantly lower. So then it's been obviously cost benefit for some of those larger operators to travel the extra distance to dispose of their general waste at the Yamundi Road landfill.
We also have the curbside collection. Does that play into it as well?
Not significantly.
Okay.
The biggest driver has been that there's more parity in our pricing between the neighbouring councils, so there's less of a cost benefit for them to actually.
Less incentive for people who live in other shires to come and dump here.
Correct.
But the explanation given here in the comments is predominantly timing of waste levy payments to the state government. So
there's a bit of waste levy as well payment in there, but it's a mix. It's that mix of the waste levy timing as well as the driver of the greater parity between the two.
But that means we've still got an ongoing commitment to pay that waste levy to the state.
Correct.
It just hasn't. It's just a timing issue with regard to where it falls within the period of the annual budget.
So as the volumes move, so does if our timing of when we expect that commercial waste to come through the gate changes, then so does our timing for when we expect we'll get recovery from the waste levy back and forth between the suppliers and state government.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Waste bin recoupment revenue.
Yes.
What's that involve?
It's replacement bins. So if
people ask for replacement bins but aren't paying for them,
it's where we have assumed to be a certain level of with the budget. We've assumed a certain volume of replacement bins during the year, and it's been lower than what we expected.
Okay, so
yes, it's purely that we haven't had to replace as many bins, and part of that could have been the change in with the waste levy and the changes with the bin pricing this year may have driven some of that. I'm not sure, Councillor.
Could you explain a bit about the investment revenue 37,000 above budget, but the dot point below that mentions downward movements of interest rates. So how are you balancing that? You're still managing to get exceeding your budget expectations for interest returns, but the trend is downward.
Yes, so there's probably two things driving that. One is up until this month, if you look at the 12-month trend on page 154, you'll see that the mix of funds. So this month, our last term deposit that we had a 12-month term deposit at the higher rate. So last year, with the issuing of the rates 12 months ago, we invested with a range of commercial agencies such as NAB, Commonwealth Bank, obviously paying quite a good rate at the time. And as we've had the downward trend, we've exceeded the market baseline for interest rate return because we've had our term deposits held and the interest rates have dropped. So we've bettered the market over the last 12 months. But those last term deposits matured this month. So what we're likely to see when we reinvest our July issue rates is that with that downward trend, we won't be exceeding market expectations as well for the second half of this year. We are lucky though that QTC, who we've got most of our cash with at the moment, is offering a rate that is quite competitive, above what the banks are offering. So it's high return and lowest risk for us as a council. They obviously need the cash for reinvestment more than what the commercial institutions do at present. So we'll continue to reassess each month whether there's benefit in reinvesting with the commercial agencies over the next few months.
And again, one would expect as those interest rates change, so too will our forecasts for expected revenue out of those. So.
That's right. So we may find that the forecast for next year's budget may be much more conservative again still, if we don't see any upward trend in interest rates over the next few months.
And why would waste utility charges be significantly above budget?
From my understanding, Councillor, I can take this one on notice to confirm this for you.
Is that more customers than anticipated?
No, it's actually in relation to the forecast we use for the budget for mixed use properties. So when we changed the rating structure this year for the waste levy, and we did separate some of the combined bin service charge into separate charges, so it was clearer what the garden waste, recycling waste and general waste charges were to enable, for example, those larger mixed use properties to assess the benefit of changing their bin structure. we were probably a little bit too conservative in terms of understanding what that revenue mix was following the change. So it was very, very conservative budget estimate there from our part, but not
Joe.
growth.
General rates 55k above year-to-date target. That means people have been paying their rates on time,
Yes.
more greater than expected. But under interest on overdue rates and charges 56k above year-to-date budget. Is that from this year's rates or an ongoing?
Ongoing historical arrears and rates, Councillor.
So that 56 doesn't relate to that 55k above.
No. What we're hoping is on page, I can find it for you.
The overdue.
Page 156 on the key performance indicators, we do actually report our rates and arrears percentage. With the work that we've been doing to obviously inform and address the long-term arrears, hopefully we should see that trend stabilise in the next 12 months as we continue to negotiate and work with rate payers.
And how has that been going over the years? Is it on the increase or is it staying fairly steady?
It's at this point it's staying fairly steady.
Thank you.
Someone care to move a motion, councillors? Move Councillor Jackson, seconded Councillor Glasgow. Any councillors to speak? Thank you, Trent. Excellent report. Lots of detail in there.
Would you like us to vote on it?
I'm speaking to it. Yeah, lots of detail in there. I appreciate the dashboard that you present, the graphics that you use. It helps with the understanding, and the comments, the supporting comments, and I'm impressed that you're willing to expand on those comments as well. So thank you. It's helpful.
My apologies, Mr. Chair.
That's all right, Chair. Any other councillors wish to speak to the motion? Put the motion. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Next item is item 9, local government legislative reforms, electoral and other legislation, accountability, integrity and other matters bill, which is before the Parliament for consideration. Hello, Diana.
Hello. It's all the exciting stuff.
Yeah, that's on page 161.
I'd like to move that.
Move Councillor Jackson, seconded Councillor Juricic.
I'd like to ask some questions first.
Sorry, questions, Joe?
Diana, I know that these aren't ours, but there's some interesting things that pop up in this. Other proposed changes on page 165. Councillors, in the event that filling vacancies. In the first 36 months, if a vacancy arises for a single councillor elections, it's by division, for divisions by election, and for multi-member or undivided councils appoint the next candidate. What happens if the next candidate does not wish to take up the position or has moved on? Or, especially if all candidates are so disposed, I mean.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I can answer that. In the draft bill, and I personally don't think this is going to work, by the way, but...
well, these are the reasons I'm asking questions. I
know the local government association's taking up this issue with the state about this. So the way it works is that Electoral Commission of Queensland, this is under the bill, Joe, what they're talking about, the Electoral Commission of Queensland would effectively offer it to the first person to see if they're interested. If they're not, then it drops down to the next and so on until they determine whether that's going to work. In some of the small and western councils where people have left town,
this is what I'm alluding to. Yeah,
it's going to be quite practically difficult, I think, to deal with that. You might have a new job after 2.5 years, or whether you may not. So I'm aware that LGAQ is taking up that issue with the state, and they're suggesting that the by-election approach would be more sensible, or if you wanted to do the second candidate, the next candidate below the line, so to speak, they'd probably only apply for 12 months. I think they're taking that approach.
That's what I'm alluding to. I think there's a time limit, should be constrained. One would think a time limit would be referred to, because the next one is in the last 12 months by appointment from council. But from what range of potential candidates? I mean, who makes the decision on who a potential councillor candidate?
That provision's already in the current legislation. It can be used, but the way that it works in practice is the council would advertise and say, is anyone interested? In fact, Kippy did this in 2015, where they advertised for a vacancy. People could put their name forward. The council would then look at that and may do interviews or whatever, and then ultimately make the appointment or make that decision.
Odd that a by-election isn't the answer in each of those, but anyway, Page 166. I'm not sure. I'm sure I'm not reading this the way it's intended, but it says the council's to keep ROIs for 10 years after councillor's office or officer employment ends. It's for the council to keep those, not meaning that the register must be kept up to date for 10 years after leaving office or leaving a position, I assume.
No, it's just a record keeping.
It's just a record,
yeah.
just a matter of record keeping for 10 years after the person's left employ.
Yep.
That's the third, next one down, agendas and minutes. Committee meetings must have minutes, Mr. CEO. What does this mean for council's committee meetings currently?
Well, if you look at what we're doing in this particular one, we are currently doing the movers, seconders, who voted, and so on. Ditto with the
I'm more thinking
our
about
initial committees,
planning and our infrastructure committees.
I haven't seen the details of this. As you see, this is what's proposed to be in regulation, so it depends on how they word that regulation, what the requirements are. One thing that might or might not change, depending on what the regulation says, is whether or not at the beginning of the meeting the council committee would need to adopt its minutes from the previous committee meeting, but that will depend on what the wording in the regulation is. I'll probably be looking at all of this, and very similar to the Belcara 2 legislation, they put forward a whole lot of stuff and only half of it made it through the parliamentary process. A lot of it changed, so it's only when the final format will come out.
So these haven't gone through the...
No,
Okay, so
it's only a bill, a proposed bill.
Okay. These aren't even the bill.
No, these are
these aren't. These are in fact what they might be
these are just the
talking about
proposals of what they're going to take to state parliament.
In a regulation. This part's actually about what they might or might not put in a regulation.
I thought the next one on the following page with regard to informal meetings, have a policy about informal meetings are required to publicly notify when and where such meetings be held and their outcomes. I mean, that's essentially just showing a diary of
we don't know the detail. We don't know what they're going to put in a regulation or not.
I'm assuming that could be covered by a diary, so something along those lines with regard to when meetings are held and where they're held. So, but it also and their outcomes. So that's an interesting one.
Well, we don't use workshops or informal meetings to make decisions, and obviously this is around the possibility that some councils are in fact using informal meetings to direct staff.
I mean, we publicly notify them in a diary of when meetings are being held, so people are aware of what we're discussing and when. And when.
I'm on a group with the Local Government Association having a look or giving advice to LGAQ about some of the practical issues around this. And it's my understanding that the department on the informal meetings is really trying to focus on, there are some councils who have what they call pre-agenda meetings, so the agenda's issued and then all the councillors get together before a council meeting and talk through and whatever. And I think that's mainly where they're focused, but it really depends on how they structure this in terms of any wording in a regulation to find out what implications it would have or not have for us. So it's a bit of a watch this space.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to ask a question about electoral gifts do not need to be recorded.
There's a separate electoral gift recording process that applies. So on our standard kind of like gifts register, you don't need to go down that path, but if you do get electoral gifts, you need to record it through the ECQ portal.
So it'll still be registered somewhere.
It's just it's on. It's going to be online, and I think that's one of their key initiatives this year with the election. That it all goes through their portal online.
Which is up and running now.
And it will have to be done within a certain time frame, 7 days of receiving or something like that, I believe.
So it doesn't have to be in the councillor's register.
No, it's all it's through the ECQ direct.
So those will stay live forever.
Absolutely. It's in their record keeping system.
Yeah, and the reporting is a very very strict time frame to report on.
Yes.
So currently gifts between 500 and 2,000 need only be recorded in perpetuity.
Whereabouts are you?
Still page 166 above electoral gifts do not need to be recorded. The one above that is gifts between 500 and 2,000 need only be recorded for 2 terms.
So that's under speculation. It's still something that may or may not occur. So it's a future regulation.
Currently they record in perpetuity. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
So now it might be limited in the future.
Okay.
That's again about the register of interests.
Correct.
Councillors
Correct. Not about the disclosures under the Electoral Act.
Yeah.
So I suppose they're trying to just figure out how does it all link up and work, and where do we?
Given they had a 10-year time frame earlier, 2 terms is 8 years. It's getting towards that 10-year time limit. 7 years statutory declarations. So from a legal sense, isn't it, Brett? You've only got to keep tax records and that for 7 years.
Now, it depends. There are different types of records. As a council, we have obligations to keep records, some forever. So council minutes, for example, are kept forever. Others 7 years, others 14 years. It depends on the class of documents. We have a classification system under the State Archives legislation that we're bound to.
I would suggest that should be in line with the 10 years of, once a councillor or an employee has left the employee, that's kept for 10 years after they've left, as opposed to 2 terms. But when they're still on council, it should still be relevant information while they continue to be a councillor. So perhaps that's something we could.
Can I just ask something about that? What Joe was talking about. It seems that one of them talks about what council has to keep, but perhaps the first ones, which are about gifts 500 or donations 500 or greater, is what must be recorded, which perhaps means if you as a councillor have a second term, you still have to record in your interest registry what you received the term before.
Yes, possibly.
That's probably my reading.
Possibly,
well.
yes. Possibly. Maybe.
But again, the devil will be in the detail in terms of what the wording of the regulation
is.
But overall, a lot of these changes are very good. But as I said, the devil's going to be in the detail in terms of what comes out in the regulation and what makes it through Parliament in terms of the bill itself.
I've got no issue with them, just the clarity on what some of them are referring to.
Well, councillors, we can ask questions during debate as well, so that's why I'll second this and we'll get it underway. Ingrid.
All right, yeah, I'll speak. It's great to see the Queensland Government continues to pursue a rolling reform agenda to strengthen the transparency, accountability and integrity measures in the system of local government and elections in Queensland. The new bill, which is a bit of a mouthful, the Electoral and Other Legislation Accountability, Integrity and Other Matters Amendment Bill, has strong penalties of up to 2 years imprisonment for not declaring a conflict of interest or not keeping up-to-date register of interest. So it's getting tougher, and that's not a bad thing. It's interesting that the new prescribed conflicts of interest, currently called material conflicts of interest, will be more clearly defined, with councillors not allowed to participate in council decision-making on matters relating to a person or entity from whom they receive gifts or donations totaling more than $2,000 during the councillor's current or previous term. I'm also interested that the bill amends the Local Government Act to provide that a councillor may give direction to a local government employee who provides administrative support to the councillors. This appears to have been ambiguous before, because I recall right at our induction as new councillors we were told we would get some support from a shared assistant. So I think this clarification must be needed if that wasn't clear. It's interesting, some of the things that Joe pointed out in the future regulatory amendments, the things that are in the pipeline and being considered. State government is looking at requiring committee meetings to take minutes, as we've already looked at. Of course, back in April 2018, I moved a motion for committees to take minutes, which was not seconded, and in August 2019, my motion again was lost about taking minutes for committees. So it'll be interesting to see what the outcome of the deliberations are. Similarly, in August 2019, I called for informal councillor workshops, briefings and discussion forums about council matters to be open to the public and to have notes taken. So it's interesting to see that the state government is considering, quote, any new or additional information arising at the informal meeting or workshop to be available as soon as possible before the briefing session or workshop to all councillors and the public, and quote, councils to have a policy about informal meetings and required to publicly notify when and where such meetings will be held and their outcomes. One thing that Noosa Council is definitely on the front foot on, that is currently being considered, is that Noosa Council already makes agendas and related reports available to the public at the same time as councillors, well in advance of council meetings. And I gather from seeing that that's something they're looking at, that we're perhaps well in advance on that one. I'd like to see Noosa Council get on the front foot with some of those other things, including committee minutes and opening up those closed informal council workshops and briefings to the public. Why wait until council is forced to? Thank you.
Any other councillors wish to speak to the motion?
Yeah, look, just in reply to that, it's not a matter of council necessarily being forced to. It's obviously driving change in other councils where transparency is not as evident as it is in some councils, and where reforms haven't been addressed. There are obviously challenges, and with the way that record keeping and minute taking is done within the agendas of some councils within Queensland, and I think we do a pretty good job of making all of that information available. Again, with regard to committee meetings, must have minutes. That currently stands, but it's where, with regard to committee meetings having outcomes and how committee meetings make recommendations, and the essence of what our two committees do forms the agenda of the following meeting. So in essence, there is a form of record keeping that does occur with regard to committee meetings at present. So I look forward to seeing the bills debated in Parliament and what the final outcomes will be. And of course, as we've said, the devil is in the detail as to what they're trying to achieve here.
Councillor Wellington.
Yeah, it's really useful to understand, and I didn't fully understand it until I went to a number of national conferences, the degree to which in Queensland councillors are able to participate in the decision making in council, the degree to which they're expected to participate. On other councils in other states, they don't get paid anywhere near as well as Queensland councillors, and that's because generally they tend to be people who have full-time jobs and just operate as councillors in a part-time fashion. That means they're not sitting here day after day having workshops the way we are, getting involved with staff the way we are, etc. It's quite a different approach. We are very blessed in Queensland to have a system where it's recognised that the engagement of the elected councillors within the council actually leads to better decision making, and where Queensland councils are remunerated appropriately. As a result of that, and I've compared with other states, most other states are lucky to have 1 or 2 workshops a month or informal meetings, whereas we have them on a weekly basis. So it is a slightly different structure here. I think it's fantastic that the state government's taking a close look at the issues around transparency and reporting, and you know, it's obviously it behoves us to see what the LJQ's position is as well, and of course the LGMA that Brett sits on, to find out you know, what other councils think about these supposed measures, or proposed measures, I should say. In terms of our informal meetings, we do not direct the council staff or the council through informal meetings. If anything comes out of an informal meeting that needs a decision, then it comes back to council in the form of a report. In terms of the portfolio committee meetings, we already take a record. It wouldn't be much of a stretch to turn that record into minutes. It just means that we have to ratify it at the following portfolio committee meetings. Nevertheless, the results of those committee meetings are quite clear in our ordinary meeting agenda, where the recommendations from those committees are visible in the ordinary meeting agenda, which is not very different to the outcome of the meetings anyway. So I'm not sure that we're going to gain any transparency by having minutes from the portfolio committee meetings, though if we do, there's no harm in doing so. In terms of the rest of it, it'll be interesting to see where we all finish up.
Yeah, just to expand on that point, we have a meeting of a record of meeting, which is in the ordinary meeting agenda from the committees. It lists from the portfolio meetings the record of attendance, the apologies, the conflict of interests, how the conflicts are recorded, how the conflicts are handled, and how each councillor voted on each recommendation from those portfolios. And as the Mayor said, it wouldn't be much of a stretch to reclassify that as minutes and ratify them at every committee meeting, but for those interested in seeing what happens, a record of what happens at the committee portfolios, all that information is already there on the public record. And Noosa Council has for many decades had a long-standing commitment to openness and transparency, and I look forward to what comes out of the reforms. Any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Jackson, you wish to close?
I'd like to ask the CEO a question. I may be slightly confused here, but when it comes to conflict of interest, which is reported or disclosed in the planning and environment or the organisation and services, and let's say something gets referred to general committee, I'm under the impression that it's only the ordinary meeting agenda that shows the conflicts of interest, not the general committee agenda.
The outcomes of the, I use the service and organisation as an example. The outcomes of the service and organisation committee, we would record a declaration of a conflict of interest at that meeting if someone declared it on a particular item. It's those, that is what's reported to the ordinary council meeting. The actual item is not, so it's those minutes or those outcomes of that meeting aren't reported to this general committee. They're only reported.
If it's referred to general.
So what's referred, what's referred is just the report,
not the conflicts of interest. It's not as such minuted in the general committee.
Because those minutes feel like are going to the ordinary meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Wish to closing?
Well, yes, I guess just as a right of reply. Look, I think the more our council can do to improve its transparency, the better. It is true that in other states, people just get honorariums and work full-time in their own jobs. But at the same time, as we do it differently, and we have hundreds of workshops, there'd be 100 at least a year that we have briefings and workshops as council, which are closed door. I think some of the wording here, which is about any additional information arising and notifying the public, is worthy of consideration, because there are lots of things that we talk about that never get seen, and it's something, we are elected representatives and we debate. We may not end up with, as you say, a final decision, but we are debating within those closed doors. So I think there is room for improvement there. But beyond that, what this is really all about is recognizing the importance of what the state government is doing here, and I think we're all very supportive of all of that.
Put the motion, those in favour? Against? Motion's carried unanimously.
Thanks, Di, for a great
Thank you,
report.
Di. A lot of work.
Very thorough report. Well done.
Next is the final item, the update on the Sustainable Tourism Stakeholder Reference Group. A report for noting.
I'll ask one question up front.
Yes, Joe.
Who wrote the report?
With input from myself, basically the two of us put it together.
What would you consider then to be the status of this report?
It's an update report to council on the deliberations of the group so far.
It was if you recall, Councillor Jackson, if I may answer that as well, if you don't mind. At the last meeting of the group, I suggested that this happen, partly to put on record what the group's been doing, but also to add to public understanding of what the role of the group is and the many issues that have been covered. So
has the Sustainable Tourism Stakeholder Reference Group endorsed this report that was written by Councillor Wellington and yourself?
No, not per se. The report was circulated out to members of the group, but it wasn't endorsed as such. To get everyone to sign off, if that's what you're getting at? Yeah, no.
They haven't agreed.
There was no request for a universal endorsement of it. When I distributed it on the 9th of December, the intention was to see if there were any problems that anyone had or any omissions, etc. And no omissions were raised and no specific issues in terms of the content was raised between then and now. And that initial email on the 9th of December did note that the intention was to bring it to either the January or February round of council meetings, so here it is.
So just, sorry.
I'm not quite finished, thank you. For the CEO as well, in your report, you say attachment 1, which is the report that we're talking about, to this report is an update report from the STSRG regarding progress to date. Is it an update report from the STSRG, or is it really an updated report from Councillor Wellington?
Yeah, representative on it.
Well, recommendation A reads that notes the report on the Sustainable Tourism Stakeholder Reference Group provided as attachment 1, which has been provided as an update on the deliberations of that group to date.
Oh, I was reading your staff report. Yeah.
So it's the recommendation is what's intended.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So just to clarify, it's not an accord or an agreement between all parties on the group. It's not an action plan.
No.
Representing the aspirations of the group.
So to be clear, no, there was never an intention that it be an action plan, and as you would be aware, Councillor Wilkie, the group has attempted previously to come up with a written accord and action plan, but has failed to be able to achieve unanimous support for those endeavours. So this is really just to explain what the group's been doing and the various issues that have been discussed. Hopefully by covering off on all the different attitudes or opinions that have been brought to the table.
Any councillor care to move the motion?
I'll move.
Moved Councillor Wellington, seconded Councillor Glasgow. Wish to speak to it, Tony?
No, I think we've done that, except that to say that I do want to thank sincerely all the participants in the STSRG for their goodwill and their time over the last, whatever it is, just over a year and a half. I think the group, even if it hasn't come to an agreed accord, has still been an incredibly useful process in terms of airing a whole lot of issues and importantly quite often putting to bed some myths that have been floating around in the community about things like numbers of events, road closures, impact of tourism, etc. Combined with the value of tourism report that was carried out by Tourism Noosa with Noosa Council's support, I think it gives a really interesting picture as to not only where we're at tourism-wise and the impacts of tourism, but also the difficulties of trying to come to a simple or easy approach to sustainable tourism into the future. Obviously that means there's more work for this organisation to do, or this cohort of community and business representatives to do.
Any other councillors wish to speak? Ingrid?
I would like to move an amendment, please.
Yeah.
And this one, it's an amendment to item A, and it says that item A be amended to read all the same words but adding in, so note the report on the Sustainable Tourism Reference Group provided as attachment 1, which has been written by Councillor Wellington and provided as an update on the deliberations of the group to date, but not endorsed by the group.
I'll second that.
Seconded Joe.
Thanks.
Ingrid?
Yeah, I'll just speak to that. I'm a councillor member of the Sustainable Tourism Stakeholder Reference Group and have attended most of its meetings. When this general committee agenda became available to the public, 5 members groups of the Sustainable Tourism Reference Group sent the following emails confirming that STSRG had not endorsed the report and that the report is Councillor Wellington's. The Hastings Street Association, Noosa Junction Association and Noosaville Business Association wrote, as advised, quote, as advised when the draft report was circulated on 14th of December, the timing to seek engagement with our committees and members was ill-opportune due to the approaching festive season. Our association committees are only reconvening later this month as we have been focusing on our businesses over this peak time of year. Accordingly, the business associations, can in no way endorse the reports until such time as our committees have a chance to review and comment. Also, an email came from Michael Gloucester of the Noosa Parks Association, who wrote the following, quote, "It is NPA's understanding that the report going to council is the mayor's personal take on STRSG deliberations. NPA is entirely comfortable with any member of the STRSG reporting back to their organization on general STRSG deliberations as the mayor is doing now." So back to what I'm saying, as a result, it is my view that council should show respect to the members of the group, and that the motion should not contain any ambiguity in attributing the status of the report. This should be fully transparent. So I propose this motion stating that who wrote the report and what the STSRG has not endorsed it.
Tony.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with the new wording or the wording in the amendment. However, I would like to point out that the email that was only received a couple of days ago after I circulated to the STSRG members links to the report and the document, which they had already received, states that it was circulated on the 14th of December, which is not true. It was circulated on the 9th of December. The document also says that that as advised, the timing was not ideal. Well, in fact, I was never advised of this. I have not received any correspondence from Hastings Street Association, Noosa Junction Association or Noosaville Business Association with regard to the timing of the document. And when it was originally sent out, it was pointed out repeatedly, in fact, with further correspondence, that it would be coming to either January or February round of meetings. Although it hasn't been officially endorsed, Landcare have written and said, we, Noosa Landcare, are happy to have this document as a report on the topics discussed. Zero Emissions Noosa said, first of all, thanks to Tony for a great effort in trying to encapsulate nearly 2 years of ruminations by the STSRG. The report is Tony's and we should not attempt to rewrite other than to correct egregious errors, and no one raised any errors. So I don't have a problem with the clarity being provided in the amendment. However, I just want to put on the record that this was well circulated and people have had plenty of time to either ask that there be an extension from the deadline that was already delivered at the beginning, which was the January or February round of meetings, and correspond with me, and that didn't happen until the report ended up on the public record via the agenda, which is exactly what I said on the 9th of December was going to happen.
Yep. Joe?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to support the amendment because the first question I raised when I saw this, as there was no name associated with the report, was who wrote it, because it does give, given that there are so many varying groups and interested parties within the Sustainable Tourism Stakeholder Reference Group, that it does, I think, give a an understanding of where that perspective is derived from, and whose understanding of the undertakings or the deliberations to date have been. You know, one of the first things that comes to mind is what I consider to be a fallacy: the well-established limit on population growth, continually known as the population cap. When we all in here know that that's not actually the correct terminology. It's actually projected carrying capacity of land based on planning scheme uses. So those are the...
Just as a point of order raised, speaking mainly about the amendment, Joe.
Well, I am. That's why I'm referring to where the knowing who the author is in regard to the points quoted within it, the questionable elements of it. I'm happy to leave that till the debate on the motion in general, but I'm happy to. That's why I support the fact that it's knowing who it's written by and the perspective that it comes from. Okay. Is a big.
We'll leave the substance of that.
I'm happy to do that, Mr. Chair. Happy to do that, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Jess?
No, you're right.
No. I'm happy to support this. The report is written by the Mayor. He's done an excellent job summing up the summing up the work, the issues covered. But it's true, it was not endorsed by the group, but the fact is it was not required to be endorsed by the group either. So it's a statement of fact. So I'll support the amendment. Mr. Closing?
Perhaps I'll mention that from feedback I received informally from business associations, there had been an expectation that before going to council and publishing the report, that there would have been an opportunity for the stakeholders to approve that publication. That's just a comment, yeah.
I'll put the amendment. Those in favour? Carried unanimously. Go back to the original motion. Councillor Wellington has spoken to the original motion. Joe, did you wish to make your points?
I'll continue there. Yes,
Yeah.
So some of the work done so far has been great. And there's some very interesting information and some corrections of some understandings with regard to the impact of tourism to some degree on our community. And I think the adjoining value of tourism report is a very interesting document to read with regard to how many people feel that tourism is have negative impacts of tourism, but also the positive impacts on tourism on the community, and how many actually value tourism in our community. So one of my reading through this report, that's why I thought it was important to understand whose perspective it came from. That I thought the population cap was a misused term, and I think we should cease using that and correctly understand that it's a projected carrying capacity of land based on planning scheme uses. But the report did raise some interesting questions, one of which for me was, how often do we record vehicle movements in and out of Hastings Street? Do we actually have numbers on that on an annual basis, day-to-day basis, to see when and where those impacts are increased, and what it would have been good to have had past historical information to see what the impact of the change we're making with regard to transport solutions is having on those numbers actually going in and out, rather than the waiting times. The number of bed spaces available on current use rights was one of the first things that hit me in those opening paragraphs, and it wasn't until page 19 that it was mentioned that we don't actually have those figures. It would be, where we have the carrying capacity for residential residents, we don't have the carrying capacity for visitor numbers as to the number of beds they can actually do, and then to look at what the impact of the additional short-term letting potentially is on those bed numbers. So there's information we gather there. I note that one of the Gold Coast beaches numbers was quoted over Noosa main beach, but there are many more highly utilised beaches on the Gold Coast that would overshadow the numbers likely on our main beach. Ultimately, I think what we're seeing here, I think the value of tourism report that goes along with this is a very interesting report to read, and the statistics therein highlight some of the challenges for tourism going forward. Ultimately, I think Noosa's greatest threat is its own success. That we perpetuate that level of people wanting to come here and people wanting to live here because it's such a great place to visit and such a great place to live. That's it.
Thank you, Joe.
I would like to move another amendment, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
No, it's not that one. It's that one. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry. Sorry. So I think we need to put an "and" in front of the word "on." Yeah, thanks. So this is an amendment again to item number A. Number A being that we note the report. Sorry, where's number A? Oh, I've got to have a look. Item A is noting the report on the Sustainable Tourism Reference Group, which we have now agreed will be written by.
I don't think you need the word "and."
Councillor Wellington. Well, I think otherwise it'll be confusing. Anyway, I don't think it matters. Maybe not. I guess the reason I'm suggesting this is because in a previous time in council, when an issues paper was provided about short-term accommodation online platform issues paper, that also was asked for noting, and we had a discussion about whether noting is endorsing, and we clearly differentiated during that discussion that in fact noting is not endorsing. But in fact, if you looked at the short-term accommodation platform issues paper on page 2, it says endorsed by council. So it had been sort of seemed to be written with the intent of endorsing. So I just think, again, in terms of clarity, and again to respect the fact that this paper has not been endorsed even by the stakeholder group, that it's good to write in that council at this point is noting and not endorsing the document.
Yeah, second.
Yeah. Someone willing to...
sorry.
A long introduction, I think.
Sorry, I'll second for the sake of argument.
Joe. Second by Joe.
Sorry, that was my speech. I'd forgotten that.
Okay. Right, so you basically had your speech.
I've had my speech. Sorry, I went off and spoke. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Joe, you wish to speak? Councillor Wellington? Jess?
Stating the obvious.
Yeah, it says exactly what it is.
Yeah, again, I've argued against this this sort of amendment in the past for the sake of the fact that it is stating the obvious, that noting is noting. There is no endorsement or otherwise. The fact that we have clarified who the author of the report is, I think, was the most significant element of the report that wasn't covered, and also the fact that it's not endorsed by the group as a whole. I have in the past not supported these type of amendments on the sake that it's business as usual, and the wording, it's wording the obvious for the sake of wording the obvious. I won't support it.
Anyone else wish to speak? Wish to close?
Yeah, I'll just mention again that previously when we had the short-term accommodation online platform issues paper, even though we were asked to note, the paper in it was endorsed. So I think it's really important to be clear on what council is doing.
Okay. Put the amendment. Those in favour? Those against?
You want to call that for Kathy?
Yes.
Okay, so in favour is Glasgow,
Sorry.
Jackson and Wilkie. Against, Jurisovic and Wellington.
Call it.
It's carried. So we go back to the original motion.
And I have one more amendment.
And one more amendment.
I'm recommending adding number D. Recommend that membership of the Sustainable Tourism Stakeholder Reference Group be open to other community groups with an interest in the opportunities, issues, benefits and impacts of tourism.
Mr. CEO, before we call for a seconder for this, I'm not sure that we can actually make such a decision because the decision is not council's alone. So that would be actually moving an amendment or something that council actually cannot do. We are not...
Cannot recommend?
Yeah, that's what I'd question.
Okay. Yeah.
I think if the council was so inclined, it could deal with this. Yep.
Okay. Is there a seconder for this, please?
Yeah, I'll second.
Joe? Ingrid?
Yeah. Look, I guess the benefits and impacts of tourism are key matters for Noosa Shire, and I believe that participation in the reference group should be open to all relevant stakeholder groups for whom it's relevant, and not necessarily just those that were initially selected to be part of the group 2 years ago. The purpose of the group is important and it should not be a closed shop. And remember, over those last 2 years there have been some additional new groups formed, such as the Sunshine Beach Business Association. And I note that at the moment the Prejean Beach Business Association is not in the group. There may be others, similar organizations to do with residence, environment, business that could be involved. The terms of reference state the aim is to develop a social contract between the tourism sector, Noosa Council and the community. And I think that word community is broad, and we must remember that any group that is in the stakeholder reference group at the moment, they're not elected representatives, they're people who run a group. So it should be more open, is my position.
Yeah, Tony.
Look, we put together stakeholder groups all the time, and we don't open it up to everyone in the community because you'd end up with a group so large that it would be very difficult and unwieldy. The decision about which groups should participate in the STSRG was made by Noosa Council and Tourism Noosa. I've only actually had in 2 years one other group come to me and ask why they weren't involved. And it's because that particular group was too small really to be representative, if you like. It wasn't a key stakeholder, if you like. Of course, you could argue for hours about which groups should or shouldn't have been invited. The decision was largely made by Tourism Noosa and Noosa Council to invite organisations which were significant players and of a significant size, and which covered geographically the whole of the Shire, making sure that we had good representation from business groups, from resident representative groups and environment groups. And it's already fairly unwieldy as a room full of people with strong opinions. The alternative would be to hold regular kind of open forums, if you like, which would be, you know, to put them in the J and invite all the community to come along. And you know, I'm not sure that you get a better result that way because it is much more difficult to have a one-on-one debate when you keep adding more and more people. This was one way of looking at it. There's lots of ways to skin this particular cat, and there's no reason why we can't, or the STSRG indeed can't have you know, some open community forums where you know, the entire community can come along and people can present and questions can be asked. The suggestion that it's a closed shop is a bit rich, I think, because the purpose of these of the STSRG is that the individual representatives are supposed to go back to the group that they represent and give them information about what's been going on at the meetings. Therefore, the intention has always been that what goes on at the STSRG meetings trickles out into the community through the representatives that are on the STSRG. It may be that this hasn't been happening effectively, but we can't, of course, force the participants to carry out those sort of actions. It's also arguably not a closed, I don't want it to be a closed shop, which is why I've gone to the trouble of writing this report and bringing the report to the public agenda. And the only way to get it in the public was to bring it to council. That was, well, that was the best way to put it on the public record, what the organisation's been up to. I think that this is something that the STSRG can take on board. I don't think council necessarily has to recommend that it open up to other groups. I think I'm not prepared to recommend that unilaterally without discussing it with the STSRG. I think it would be up to the members of the STSRG to determine whether there are other groups they would like to invite to come on board, rather than council make a decision and make a recommendation to them. So I can't support the amendment.
Look, I appreciate the intent with which Councillor Jackson brings this, and I see there are some potential gaps in representation within the group. It's generally representative of a good cross section and a good mix there. But I agree with Councillor Wellington's comments that I think the STRWG.
That's a malapropism by the CEO.
Yeah, so that could consider the opportunities there within, and if any group feels they could be a stakeholder in that, could approach the group for inclusion in. I said that there doesn't appear to be a Tawat representation, the Sunshine Beach representation, a Peregian Business Association representation, even though there's a Peregian beach community association, which would, I'm sure, in some degree incorporate some of the businesses down there. So there are some potentially business stakeholders. There's very little representation from places that are impacted by tourism, like Boring Point, that have a some tourism stakeholder inclusions, as they have well alluded to us before, that we've overlooked. So I mean, I think there is scope to look at other representations, and maybe, as Councillor Wellington alluded to, a more open forum on periodically to have other people look at the discussions there and deliberations in there, and have an input. But again, once the group becomes excessively sized and unwieldy, it can become an unwieldy sort of a conglomeration there to deal with. And I believe the challenges that have been undergone in getting this group to the table have been sufficient at this stage. So, look, I don't know about the word recommended. Suggest, a suggestion that it's there is sufficient. But I'm happy to recommend that the membership be opened up to other community groups with interest if they see there's an opportunity or a necessity to be engaged in the process.
Can I ask a question of the Mayor? Does this reflect the attitude of the group already? That is, if a group who's currently not in the STSRG is really determined and wants to contribute and makes writes to the group and asks to be participate, is the group open to accepting them?
I would assume so, but however, there's not been a single group that's come to the STSRG and said, we would like to join. I have had one very small community group come to me and say, should we have been involved? And I said to them, well, given the area that you represent and the number of people on your group, perhaps not. And they were happy with that as an answer. They didn't go to the STSRG, and there was no formal, it was just in the discussion.
Yeah.
No single community group in 2 years has come to the STSRG or via me and asked to be a participant on that group.
Okay, thank you.
A question of the CEO.
Yeah.
In relation to what Councillor Wilkie was just saying, as a member of this group, I've never seen this group as having any administrative role or acting like an association. It's been a group where yourself have been the facilitator, set the agendas, brought in speakers, the group would then come to the meeting and participate. But it didn't appear to be a decision-making group in the sense of somebody coming to the group, which in a sense doesn't have an entity, to ask questions. It seemed to be, everything I've seen, it's been kind of facilitated from yourself and the Tourism Noosa.
And your question?
And Councillor Wilkie was asking if there was someone who might go to the group and ask for membership. And Councillor Wellington was talking about the group hasn't been approached, but the group, I'm not so sure there's a group that has that form of responsibility.
Or via the Mayor or the CEO.
So if someone came and said, we'd like to be part of that, whether it's by the Mayor, myself, from Tourism Noosa, or to one of the other members of the group, I think it'd be good protocol to for that to be run past the existing members, to make sure that, are you comfortable with that be represented? Because otherwise, one of the benefits of the group at the moment is quite a good mix between the different stakeholder groups, from environment, community and business. And if suddenly, whether it was the council or Tourism Noosa suggested that 4 more groups from a particular sector was added, the group might feel uncomfortable. So I think in terms of having...
To go to balance.
Correct. So I think in terms of if there was going to be a change, I think it would be appropriate for the group itself to provide comment or feedback on whether that would be a good thing or not.
So further to that question, CEO, has the group only kept its deliberations within, or have they gone out to other community organisations that may not be involved and sought their input?
The intent early on was made pretty clear to members was that it would be a good thing if the individual representative went back and spoke to their group. So you know, if you're in XYZ association and this person was representing them, they need to go back and say, what do you think about this, or bring their thoughts forward. There wasn't, and this is what the Mayor was alluding to before, there wasn't a process per se whether they would go and consult more broadly with the community. It was about their group that they're representing. Okay. That's probably the best summary I can give.
Can I, in terms of the, if I may, through the chair, just in terms of the formality of the group, it does have a terms of reference, and that terms of reference was agreed to by the group earlier on. So there are some set rules, if you like.
Yep.
Yes. I think it's been said pretty easily that, you know, groups come to Tony and he said, look, you know, you're not really big enough, you don't represent a certain cohort or however it might be, and it obviously wasn't accepted into the group. This is called this group. They sound pretty elite. We could call them a group. So, but you know, it's always good to support openness in any kind of these groups in the community. So I'll support it for that reason, and I believe that if someone did come to it, like Tony alluded to, it was they were not accepted into the group because okay, they were too small. They didn't represent enough of the cohort of the community, but you know, why not open it to anyone who wants to jump in there and have their 2 cents worth in this, I can't remember,
Sustainable Tourism
Sustainable Tourism Group. They want to get in there, and I trust that the group will make an educated and informed decision if they should be involved or should not be involved. And I think it's a pretty good indicator that in 2 years that they've only had one person, one group, that it's probably not going to get much more in another 2 years. So open it up and see what happens.
Yeah. Look, I think the intention of this group was to be as representative and as open as possible to the key stakeholders who are grappling with this issue of Noosa as a successful tourism destination. So the suggestion that it's a closed shop, I have to say with respect, is to give an absolutely false impression of this group and the intention under which it was set up. The groups that are represented here, that's correct, they're not elected representatives like councillors are. They don't make decisions per se, but the people who are representative on these groups on behalf of their associations, they are elected and selected on behalf of their associations to be there, to give comment, feedback, and to report back to their respective associations. So in that sense, it is very permeable, it is consultative, it is open, there's a flow-through effect back through their communities. I think the whole intention of the group is to be open and consultative as possible, but I'm not against the amendment in principle. As I've heard said here, it does reflect the principle under operation currently, and I don't see any harm in the amendment. So I will support it.
Perhaps a question of Councillor Jackson, seeing as you do sit on this group, and it's been going for the period that it has, do you feel that a new entity to the table, given the complexities of the issue to date and the understandings where it's got to a fairly amenable sort of an understanding or a balance around the table with everybody's perspectives at the table, that a new group would fit relatively easily into the ongoing discussions, but considering they've been going for as long as they have?
I think my answer to that would be back to what the purpose of the group is. And the purpose is to gain community feedback as well as understanding about the issues and benefits of tourism and the things that may need to be done to manage things better. And I think that therefore any contribution to that is valuable. And I think that we're talking about a very broad community with a diversity of people in it. And I'm not talking about having everyone in the community, just community groups. Yeah.
Just wondering whether it'd be a regressive step to try and, you may have to cover old ground again.
Can you ask me the same question?
Can I ask you the same question? Because you're on the stakeholder group as well. It's just that Jim was the one making the move,
Sure.
I suppose I should ask both of you, or the three of you that are involved.
And my view is that, and I do want to correct something that was said earlier. You know, this group that came to me didn't come to me asking to be on it. They just wanted to know about how the decisions were made about who was on it. In terms of bringing new people to the group, what we occasionally have is someone leaves an organisation and gets replaced, etc. The problem we have found is that you often need to go back and go over old ground every time someone new comes on. If you open it up to a new group, we go right back to the start to some extent, because we've then got to cover off on all the stuff that the group's already investigated. And this tends to happen in an ad hoc fashion when you get replacement people on the group already. And that's one of the reasons, I think, why making groups bigger and bigger becomes more and more unwieldy, because you keep having to go back and retread, and we're already doing that, and some members are complaining about it already, that we're retreading old ground, but we have to do it whenever someone raises an issue who wasn't there for the discussion previously.
I'm assuming that could occur if somebody was missing from the meeting as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ingrid, you wish to close?
Yes, certainly. Well, look, I guess from my point of view, I'm thinking in terms of what is the best way for this group to successfully achieve the ability to make a difference or feed to Noosa tourism and to council the concerns of the community as well as the things they'd like to see. I'm actually concerned about council's approach in general to reference groups. This one very clearly is an example where, and it wasn't actually originally Noosa Council on Tourism Noosa, I believe it was perhaps the mayor and the CEO and the chair and CEO of Tourism Noosa who got together, worked out who they recommended would be in the group, and then councillors were brought into the picture afterwards. So it's very much a kind of top-down decision-making process about who's going to be participating in the first place. And I actually don't necessarily support that as being the only way to fill a reference group that council's involved in. I believe there ought to have been some call for involvement as well. So that's sort of the overarching view I have. I would also argue that I believe Councillor Wellington talked about these being key stakeholder groups, but I don't think that if you went through that list of all the groups that are on there, that they're all necessarily some kind of peak organization and that they are necessarily highly representative. So, I mean, I think, sure, they're groups, but to attribute to them, we're perhaps in some cases being attributed more status than perhaps they really have in the community. I wasn't recommending more and more people, as was talked about. I'm really specifically talking about specific community groups that themselves have an interest in opportunities, issues, benefits, and impacts of tourism. And I'm using those words because those words are in the report written by Councillor Wellington and part of what the group is all about. Closed shop is about not allowing additional members. So Councillor Wellington's response saying, well, we published a report in this general committee agenda, that does not change whether it's a closed shop or not. That just provides your information to the public. But closed shop is really about the fact the doors are shut. I heard Councillor, I'll skip that because Tony's explained it. I think the concept of, or fear of going over new ground because there's a new member is a furphy or a kind of red herring. We're going to have elections in March and there may be some new councillors too. I think the idea that somehow people who got in first are the best ones to be in there and that you keep the doors shut to others who perhaps should have been in there in the first place, or new organizations that form that would be appropriate should be in there. And in fact, to gain buy-in with the community, the more you repeat that and help more people learn about these things, the better. So the idea that someone, oh my God, what a pain, we have to do it again. It's not such a problem. We're trying to educate. I don't see that by keeping the doors shut to potential other groups that makes it permeable. I actually think it's closed, and I would encourage, when we're trying to seek buy-in, we're trying to seek collaboration, that openness is really the best way to be.
Put the amendment. Those in favour? Glasgow, Jurisovic, Jackson and Wilkie. Against? Councillor Wellington. The amendment is carried. Back to the original motion, to which Councillor Wellington and Councillor Jurisovic have spoken. Do the councillors wish to speak to the motion?
I'll speak to the motion.
Okay.
Councillor Wellington's report on the Sustainable Tourism Stakeholder Reference Group explores issues to do with the impacts of tourism. The report has not been endorsed by the reference group members, so the views expressed in the report are not necessarily their views. In fact, the topics were presentations made to the reference group over the 2 years as food for thought and discussion. As stated in the report, the terms of reference envisioned that at the end of this process, we would have a shared agreement, a social contract between the tourism sector and Noosa Council and the community. But as stated in the report, quote, thus far such an accord has proven elusive. My concerns with the report are to do with the need to fact check and provide research evidence to underpin some of the assertions. The report tends to paint a gloomy picture and uses colorful language without any underpinning statistics. For example, quote, Noosa must once again deal with what some perceive to be looming threat, that of ever-increasing tourism numbers. Quote, community concerns have been raised about the impacts of that very attractiveness and the long-term repercussions of the village feel that many cherish. Damning words, but not supported with data. In fact, the research commissioned by Noosa Council and Tourism Noosa, which is also appended to this motion, the value of tourism to the Noosa community, found 80% of Noosa residents indicated they approved of tourism because it is good for the community and the economy. More to my liking, Councillor Wellington's report goes on to make a more factual statement, and that is, quote, residents concerned included matters pertaining to traffic congestion, access to public places, and the impacts of events. So that's helpful and something that can be managed, addressed. Regarding day trippers, the report states, quote, what is perhaps most interesting is the total overnight visitor numbers were up 8% on the previous year, and total numbers of day trippers were up twice as much, 17%. This may indicate the beginnings of a trend toward increasing numbers of day visitors. My response to that, no, it's not a trend. Comparing only a change from one year to the next does not indicate a trend. Statistical trends require longitudinal data for comparison. In relation to short stays, the report says, quote, Council's planning team received regular complaints about loss of resident amenity resulting from houses being let to tourists. My comment is that there has never been any data provided by council staff about these alleged complaints. And I can confirm that on 30th of October and several times thereafter, I, as a councillor, under the Local Government Act, have requested statistics about these complaints, and I have never received that information. Also regarding short stays, Also regarding short stays, the report asserts, quote, the other concern for council is that the increase in short stay properties has inevitably resulted in a reduction of properties available for permanent residents. But where's the evidence? The only thing in the report is general statements about research in Australia and overseas and in Byron Bay. I'm particularly concerned that the report asserts about short stays, quote, those who view the matter through the prism of local economy are most inclined to support a free market approach to short stay. Those who are inclined to view the problem through a social lens are more likely to focus on the negative impacts. This is an astounding assertion which appears to try to make out the matter is about big bad capitalism versus poor little people. It overlooks the fact that a major concern raised by residents and ratepayers alike has been the diminution of civil rights if short-term letting is made difficult or impossible by the planning scheme. To be fair, I agree with some things Councillor Wellington wrote in the report. I agree with the following, quote, there has also been unanimity on key issues in the stakeholder group, namely that both resident amenity and visitor experience are critical to the debate and that we need to start planning for the future now. Another one, which I agree with, quote, solutions being employed in many places may not really be transferable to Noosa. And finally, I also agree, quote, whilst Noosa may not yet be experiencing the sorts of impacts that other tourist hotspots around the planet are facing, it behooves us to look towards the future and plan for the future. So I'm supportive of those statements. And I'd like to end with saying that it is important for Noosa Council to plan for and manage the impacts of tourism, but it is most important not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Thank you.
Jess?
Yeah, I think from my reading the report, it was Councillor Jackson summed it up pretty well just at the end there. It's very important to plan for our future here in the tourism sector. And the report it had some pretty interesting information, I agree. But what I really, really enjoyed reading was the last bit of the agenda, which just had risks and opportunities. And it states, as indicated in the attached report, it is critical that Noosa properly plan for its future in light of current trends and future population growth in southeast Queensland. A failure to plan may risk in impacts of local lifestyle and visitor mix. That's pretty much just paramount and obvious. It's booming in and around us at the moment, and we have to plan right for our future now and our strategic long-term future. And I always talk in the 50, 60, 70-year future, like where's Noosa going to be? Like where are we at now, 2020? We were joking before about in the office about having 2020 vision, how fun that was going to be. But imagine having 2100 vision, Joe. That's a real reality. And I think any bit of literature and information that can come to the table and read over and have the information come to us is never a bad thing. Yes, some things haven't been endorsed, and it comes from the Mayor's personal view in a lot of things, which is also, the Mayor's the Mayor of the Shire, so he knows it better, I agree, in this type of industry than anyone. So I enjoyed reading it, and I really enjoyed the last little bit of risk and opportunities too.
Thank you, Jess. Look, just as a general overview, I think the formation of this group and this report, as summarised in this report, has been an ambitious and highly admirable endeavour on behalf of the Mayor and Tourism Noosa. The aim has been to grapple collaboratively with the issue of managing the impacts of Noosa's success as a tourism destination, and it acknowledges a collaborative and open approach, and that the best way forward is cooperatively as a community. The forum, the group, has provided a great opportunity to provide fact sharing and dispel myths. And one of the results of this has been a better informed community about this issue that has impacts for all of us. The report, the Mayor's report, is, from my perspective, highly recommended reading for anyone who wants to gain a factual understanding of the key issues that the Council and this group have been grappling with. And the group, because it provides an opportunity for stakeholders from business, community and environment and tourism groups, there's a wide range of perspectives that are shared. So one thing I've gained from the being there as an observer, is you get the understanding that these issues are multi-sided depending on which perspective you're coming from. And of course, if these issues that we're grappling with were easy, they would have been remedied yesterday and perfectly. But it's not an easy undertaking that we're confronting, and I commend the Mayor and I commend Tourism Noosa, and I commend each and every representative of these key stakeholder groups for their participation and signing up in this ambitious undertaking to grapple with the impacts of Noosa's success as a tourism destination. Councillor Wellington, you wish to close?
Yes, please. Councillor Jackson's been on the STSRG from the beginning, and she's never raised any issues about transparency of the group. She's never raised any issue about it being a closed shop. She's never raised the issue of adding members to the group, etc. This report, of course, was circulated to Councillor Jackson as it was the other members of the group, and she's had an opportunity to critique it before it came to council. The only response I got from her was, "Thanks very much, Tony." Thanks for doing that, Tony. Look, because the report seeks to cover a range of views, it's inevitable that people are going to read it and they're going to agree with some things and disagree with others. They're going to be vociferously in disagreement about some statements and vociferously in agreement about others. So it's not surprising that Councillor Jackson found some statements she liked and some she didn't like. And indeed, the same is true of Councillor Jurizovic, who found some holes in the report. But it is inevitably schematic, because all it's trying to do is explain where we've been without going into great detail, without providing statistics, without going into enormous detail. It's not a book, it's simply a schematic overview of what the organisation, the stakeholder group's been up to since it was instigated. If this hadn't happened, if I hadn't brought this report, then the actions of the group and its deliberations would remain opaque to most people. The whole reason I'm bringing this report to council is to shed some light on what the group's been doing, to explain the intricacies of the issues that the group's been grappling with. And no, it hasn't received endorsement from everyone on the STSRG, but it wasn't seeking to necessarily. I think the salient thing is, though, that once I'd sent it out at the beginning, early in December, no one came back and said, remove this or you've missed this out. Nothing. I didn't get any of that from anyone. This went out to every single member on the STSRG, and no one, including Councillor Jackson, no one came back to me and said, this is wrong, you've left this out, this statement should be corrected, etc. That did not happen. With regard to referring to something as the beginning of a trend, that doesn't mean it's a trend, it means a question. Could this be the beginning of a trend? I'm not suggesting a trend already exists. That's why I've used the word beginning. Complaints about short stay to our staff and statistics on that. Councillor Jackson, this is a bit of a side issue. I know it's a concern of Councillor Jackson's, I appreciate that. However, it has been explained over and over by staff that they didn't keep any record of complaints about short stay because it wasn't in their province to be able to deal with the issues. Therefore, there was no requirement on them to keep those statistics. That's why there aren't any statistics about the complaints about short stay, because it's not a matter under council's control. So in the end, I'll be damned, if you like, for setting up the stakeholder reference group. I can be damned for writing a report that some people don't like some statements that are contained in it. I can be damned for the flavour of the report. I've tried to, cover off on various arguments, and in a way, when I'm writing about a range of views, writing about one specific view and using certain language doesn't necessarily mean I'm colouring that viewpoint. What it means is I'm doing my very best, my level best, with the language skills that I have to try and convey that point of view. And there are many points of view in this document, just as there are many points of view around the table of the STSRG. I think it's been a worthwhile exercise. I hope it continues. Whether it expands or doesn't expand is really up to the group. So far it has been difficult because, as Councillor Wilkie pointed out, if the answers were simple, they would have been enacted already. They are not simple. We will continue, I am sure, to have a range of views around this table and within the community, and it doesn't hurt us to grapple with issues that are seemingly insolvable, just as we're doing with transport. So I hope you endorse the substantive motion, which is simply to note the report, noting that it hasn't been endorsed by anyone else, noting that it has been written by me, but if I hadn't done it, then no one else was inviting the SDSRG to tell the world what it's been doing. That's why I suggested that I write this report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Put the motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. And that is the final item. Thank you, councillors, for your discipline and attendance and patience.